Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming back. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to be talking about fan fiction, as the title suggests. And what I'm going to do is basically let the authors tell you about their fan fiction initially, what they write, and why they started writing it. So we'll go there, and I'll start with Gunn because you're in the upper corner of my screen.
Oh, okay. Well, I started writing fan fiction because I used to work as a nurse, and then I got MS and I couldn't work as a nurse, so I moped around. But then Star Trek Voyager started on Swedish television, season 3, and I had such a crush on Captain Janeway. And then when 709 showed up, it just all fell into place. And I was lucky to find some really cool people on mailing lists that didn't mind that a Swede tried her hands at writing in English. I knew my English was okay, but so that's where it started for me. And then I moved on later to The Devil Wears Prada and wrote that fan fiction, which I still do.
Had you written anything before you started writing Voyager?
Just short stories, poetry a lot, stuff like that, because I had little kids before then and not very much time when studying
poetry,
and so on.
Poetry is really, really close to Voyager fan fiction. I get that.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Gunn. Amanda, did you start with poetry too?
I didn't know. No, I mean, it would have been a natural leap, but no, I started with Star Trek Voyager as well, but I'd never heard of fan fiction. I had no idea what it was. And I don't even know how I came across it. I came across some archive of fan fiction about Janeway and Chakotay. Sorry, Gunn, I know it's horrible. And I was like, what am I reading? And I couldn't fathom what was going on. I was like, that's not an episode. But being in the UK, like Gunn, I was a few seasons behind. So I was like, well, maybe this is something that that can't have happened. So, and then I started to find Janeway and Seven. And then the world was opened up. I wrote for a few Voyager stories and then a few British series that you wouldn't have heard of. Devil Wears Prada. And then Once Upon a Time was the one most recently for me, and then Supergirl as well, which I dabbled in because they let go a brilliant character in season 2. So I was like, well, I'm just going to pretend that never happened and carry on writing them. So.
Well, how about you? Had you written anything before? Or
No, I'd never even considered it. I mean, I always remember the first sort of fiction thing I wrote for school. I thought I'd done an okay job. I took it to my teacher and she said, it's very interesting, but if you notice, you're using the word suddenly. And when I looked at back, it was suddenly this happened, suddenly that happened, suddenly this happened. And that was the whole thing. And it was like, and I kept that for like a few years because I thought it was hilarious because I hadn't seen it. So after that, I was burnt and then didn't write anything for years.
I have to tell you that I took a little short writing course at York one year, and Claire McNabb ran it, and she told me that I use the word suddenly too much. So
was she ever a teacher in Wimbledon?
Yeah, maybe.
You're in good company.
Allie, how about you? Did you use
read a lot of I read a lot of fan fiction, but my stories, I kind of like the books that I write. I wrote about stuff that interests me. So I wrote my own little world. So I didn't really pick a show or anything like that. I started the first one that I wrote just to see, like I said, for a long time, I wrote memos and grants. Not very exciting. Not a lot of sex and grants. Maybe I would get more grants if I actually did that. But I wrote one about if Ramses, the Pharaoh Ramses was actually a woman and falls in love with a slave girl. So I started there and people actually wrote me back and it kind of took off from there. Then I wrote one, a couple of the sites have like challenges for Valentine's Day, Halloween, that kind of thing. So I wrote a Valentine's Day story and then I wrote the ending in a different name. And then it was, I woke up the next day and I had about, 3,600 emails because I had written a Valentine's Day story with a unhappy ending. So till this day, I think it was my favorite email. Some lady wrote me and said I was the person who killed Valentine's Day. Thanks a lot.
Nice. So when you were writing The Pharaoh and the Slave Girl, was that a Xena fanfic?
Kind of similar characters, but no.
No.
It was,
So it
you know,
wasn't-
kind of in that genre. I guess everybody thought that, but it
Okay.
was not. Like I
Okay.
said, the characters might have looked familiar, but
Well,
no.
it's interesting because I'm going to just toss this out, even though I'm the moderator and I'm not supposed to. But I wrote X-Files fan fiction, but everybody thought I was writing Xena fan fiction. When I posted my original fiction that didn't have anything to do with fan fiction, everybody thought it was Xena fanfic because
Exactly. Well, I think they
my
still
hero
think
happened
that.
to have dark hair and, you know, but anyways, how about you, Megan?
Well, I was in college in the late 90s and had never heard of fanfic, but had free, fast internet for the first time in my life and started exploring and joined an X-Files fan fiction group and read these stories by this writer, Radclyffe, and it was amazing. I mean, it was just amazing. And that actually was what started my fanfic journey and into my eventually published journey. I never technically, well, I did write half of a Scully fanfic story for that group and posted it,
Yeah.
and it dwindled because I didn't finish it because I was realizing, oh my gosh, there's lesbian fiction out there, and that kind of sparked all kinds of stuff for me, and wanting to go in a more original direction. But at that time, Xena fan fiction was extremely popular, and there were a lot of sites out there that you could share your stories. So I wrote what was the first version of Infinite Loop. Not intending it to be a Xena Uber, but knowing I wanted to share it on those sites. So again, it was assumed to be a Xena Uber.
Right.
That wasn't my intention, but I was happy for people to read it because they wanted to project that onto it. I just really wanted readers for a story. So that was kind of how it all began. And then the feedback I got from that community was awesome, and the support, and the rest is history.
Yeah, I think we've all experienced how much support there is around fan fiction and how sort of really loyal the reading
Definitely.
fans can be. And I think it also says something about how readers interpret a text through their impressions and their expectations. And it's not a bad thing. I mean, it's
Yeah.
basically, we all do it when we read, but I think that we see it in fan fiction a lot. For those of you who are writing fan fiction of a specific item source, did you use those characters per se, and in the world that they were presented in, or did you take them to another universe and change their names or change their occupations? Gun?
Both. I started with classic fan fiction, but I started getting the itch to write more original stories. But I like the essence of how Captain Janeway and Seven of Nine presented themselves in the show. So what put me on the map when it came to fan fiction was my Raven's Island series, which is where I put them in the corporate world. And the first stories are pretty cringy, I think. But I keep them up because I think it shows really through that series that you do learn, even if you're just trudging on with your fan fiction. So I do like writing what you call Uber fan fiction when it's put in another setting. I do like that a lot. And even with Devil Wears Prada, I do that. I just finished a story that turned out to be longer than the latest of my books, actually. That's called The Amaranthine Law.
I didn't hear that.
Well, I wrote it together with the book, so I was fine. Kept my deadline, I promise. But and I think for me also, I feel I owe the fanfic world a lot because I've gotten so much help and encouragement and so on. So I just love to still do it. So yeah.
Amanda? Do you write original Uber fan fiction that's not specific to the show?
I do both. I'm like Gunn. I've done both. I think it depends on what I'm writing. If I'm writing a fix it, like if they've ruined something in an episode and you're like, no, then you have to go back and fix that. Then that's obviously going to be set in that environment. But similar to what you were saying, Rad, I think quite often if you do write characters at all outside of their environment, people automatically think that you're writing them anyway. So yeah, I mean, and it's a bit of a shortcut really, especially if you've got two characters that, you know, a lot of people like. You can just use those core personalities and looks and their names, and people just instantly know who you're talking about. You don't have to do the world building or the character. Well, you might have to do the world building depending on what you're doing, but character building, people know who they are. But it does carry on with you. I remember my first self-published novel, someone who'd been reading my fan fiction emailed me and said, which one's Emma and which one's Regina in this? And I was like, no, they're whatever you like.
I will say I had that experience early on when I first published both Safe Harbor and Above All Honor. I got those questions. And then when I published Shield of Honor, my hero figure is blonde. And that was very upsetting to a lot of readers who expected that they would not be. Well, we'll talk about the shortcut. You use the word shortcut, which I think is interesting, and we'll talk about it a little bit later as to how that pertains to writing original fiction later on. Meghan, I got the sense that you kind of always wrote original fiction, and you're not writing fan fiction now, are you?
I do on occasion. Well, kind of talking about the shortcut thing a little bit. I mean, I find that if I'm having trouble writing original stuff, it's a really good thing. Like if I can just do a quick fan fiction story, and a lot of times it'll be because I do see a show where they've done something horrible that I have to rectify, or you know, I just see a show where I'm like, actually, something sparks my interest about those characters. But I like it as a I don't want to say like low effort, because it's not at all. But I don't have to come up like, you know, like Amanda was saying, I don't have to come up with the personalities. I don't have to figure all that stuff out. I can just concentrate on the writing and the storytelling. And so I do find that useful just as a writing tool. And I have to say, sorry, while this, I mean, I meant to say this earlier. Rad, you were a huge influence on me when I was starting out, but Gunn, so were you. Your Voyager fan fiction was so good, and I just loved it so much, read it obsessively. So I have to say that while we're here.
Yeah, I have to add that in as well, and I have to say Raven's Island was actually very good. So you know, don't talk it down. I'm really glad you keep.
Okay,
keep it
I won't. Thank you.
Allie, are you writing anything from fan fiction wise now? And isn't Kane and Emma fan fiction? Didn't that start that way?
Well, I actually wrote it while I was writing some other stuff because I was having a little bit of writer's block. So I started it and I would put it down and then I'd pick it up, and not to sound conceited, but it's like, oh, this is really good. I should write some more. And then so I wrote until I had about, I don't know, maybe 200,000 words. That's when you asked me about it. And I'm like, no, we can't put that in one book. So I never actually put that one on any site. So I sent that one directly to you. I wish I could write, because I still get more than my share of emails, which really kind of shocks me still, because I haven't written fan fiction in a long time. That people, you know, some of the stories are still up. Some of them I took down because they're now books, but they still enjoy the stories, and I would love to write them. But every time I either have a deadline, or Victoria has edits, or Ruth has edits, or Sandy needs something, I just don't have time to do that.
Oh, you don't have time to have fun anymore.
Exactly.
We have a couple of questions. I'm going to throw this open to the group, and all of you can answer if you have an answer. If you were to start writing fan fiction, what is a good place to go to do this? How do you start with the show that interests you? And if it does, how do you find where the fan fiction is? Got any recommendations for people? How do you find where to go?
I would just say that I think at this point, Archive of Our Own is a great website to go check out. It's not as big as fanfiction.net, but I think it's better curated. And I like the format better. I also was censored by fanfiction.net once and have never been by Archive of Our Own, so that's also nice. But I think going to one of those very big repositories that's going to have a lot of eyes on it already is a really good idea. And I think starting with a show you like is important, but I would also encourage you to find a show that you like that also is somewhat popular. Because, there are definitely shows that I go and look for fan fiction and there's 35 stories and the show's been out there for 5 years. And, certainly you can write that for your own personal gratification, but if you're hoping for the support and the feedback and the community involvement, it's always good to figure out what are people into right now.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any other suggestions? Well,
I think they have a pretty big website. Is the Academy of Bards. I can't remember if it's .org or .com. I think it's .org, but that one has a lot of original fan fiction. They have Xena. They have a lot of different genres, and that one, it's a really good community. That's the one that has the actual like if you want to write something and kind of try it out, especially when a lot of people will be reading. They have the April Fool's Challenge, the Halloween Challenge, Christmas, that kind of thing. So it's a specific list they put together, and they have a lot of people who read just for that particular, because it's a lot of new original stuff.
Well, that brings up, yeah, go ahead, Gun.
No, I was just going to say, you can also look at the Facebook groups. You can do a search. Like I started Devil Wears Prada fan fiction group. I think it was 2011. I can't remember now, but it was a while ago. And I think we're at least 800 or something. And I started that because those over at Janeway 7, they started getting all the, as we call ourselves, the Mirandi fans over there. So so if you do a search on Facebook, you can find groups now that Yahoo groups or e-groups, those mailing lists have died. So
correct.
It's Facebook groups these days. Absolutely.
I just wanted to remind people, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, which is down at the bottom of your screen, not the chat list, because I won't be able to find them on the chat list. Something that Meghan said sort of rang a bell for me, which is if you want to get feedback. Do you find, those of you writing fan fiction currently or in the past, do you find that it lifts your spirits as an author? Does it inspire you? Does it make you feel more confident about your work? Is it something that you recharge? I think that as novelists, when a book comes out, not that infrequently, and we don't often get a lot of feedback. I don't get a lot of direct to me feedback, not like the hundreds of things I got when I wrote X-Files fan fiction. So do you find that helps you as an author overall to participate in this and hear from people? Amanda?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's probably one of the sort of really big points and the big pluses of writing fan fiction, because generally, I mean, unless you're particularly organized, and someone's going to show me up here and be much more organized than me, you generally write chapter by chapter and publish, in pieces, unless you're one of those people who can write the whole thing and then, have the courage to slowly publish them. So that means that you then getting feedback every time that you post a new chapter, and that can be really, really useful. It can also be really damaging as well, and it's actually quite you will get some people will just say like, great chapter, thank you very much, and some people will literally tell you every thought in their head about the last chapter, everything that the chapter thought for them, everything that the characters did. I've had people who have not understood that an antagonist is meant to do things that you don't like, and literally their review is going, I hate that woman, why did she do that, why did she say that? And it's just, but you kind of think, well, I've done the right thing because I've created an emotional response in you, so that's a good thing. But I think for me, as you were saying, when you publish a book, you don't get even 5% of the kind of feedback that you get from when you write fan fiction. And obviously if you do write fan fiction in chapters, And then you're getting a huge amount by the end of it. You've got like potentially like 1,000 comments. And I think for me, I would say that without the feedback I got, I never would have considered becoming a published author, because I never would have known that I had a talent for storytelling. You kind of crowdsource feedback from people. And when you have many, many people saying, this is a great story, please tell me more, you think, oh, maybe I'm quite good at this. Maybe I can do this. So I think for me, without fan fiction, I never would have published a novel.
Do you have the same feeling, Dawn?
Yes, yes, I do. And I think for me also is that since a lot of my writing happens when I put fingers to keyboard, that darn proposal we're supposed to submit, it drives me crazy. But so it's very free to just sit down and write and trust yourself to know that you know how to tell a story. But if you do goof up, people will let you know. But people are usually quite nice about it, I think. And it's not the end of the world. So for me, it's like greasing the wheels. And then when I go in to write my published novels, it's a confidence boost as well.
I got the sense that was true for you, Meghan.
Oh yeah, and especially because lesbian publishing was going through a lot of growth when I was kind of first starting out. Having had the feedback and knowing that people liked my stories, and then seeing some of the other fanfic writers who were starting to become published, I definitely felt like, okay, I can hold my own. I don't have to feel embarrassed about trying. I know people like my stories. I know they want to read them. Probably somebody will want to buy them. So yeah, I mean, I may have gotten there eventually to have the confidence to try, but certainly I would have been a lot more scared. I think that it means everything to be, and polishing it, I mean, I practice a lot on posting things online first, because even though I didn't do a lot of fan fiction per se, like I did post a lot of short stories. I mean, there was a lot of room back then on Academy of Bards and places to really post original stuff. And because people were going to project what they wanted to project onto it, they were still interested in reading it. So I got a lot of practice and a lot of, figuring out what people liked and what they didn't, and what worked and what didn't. So it's a great place for a young growing writer, I think.
Vali, how about feedback? If you're not getting,
well, actually, I started this. I'm trying to think when, but when I started posting, I really didn't get a lot of negative feedback. So it was, kind of interesting to see that you put something out there and it is kind of scary to do it, especially when it's not, something, like I said, if you post it on Academy or on Athenian or whatever that you're going to post it on, that people are expecting, maybe Xena and Gabrielle, and you're doing something original. It was kind of, a little nerve-wracking. But then the emails started coming in, and then the more stories that I put, the more emails I got. And it was very, very seldom that I got one that was negative. I think I only got one in the whole time that I was writing, which was great.
Lucky.
Yeah, wow.
now I have Amazon. Not so lucky anymore. When I, want to feel bad about myself, I do that. I read some of those comments, but no, but for the most part, those are still pretty good. The thing that was amazing, though, that it's like people read them. They asked a lot of questions. They were interested in sequels to some of them, which was, like really good. And then so kind of like what Amanda said, you think like, oh, I'm pretty good at this. Then you publish something and you get back your edits, and it's like, maybe not.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of work to do.
It's interesting. I mean, obviously everyone's on this panel because they've written fan fiction. So we have some shared experiences, and everyone here is also publishing novels now. And I think you can hear that there's quite a bit of difference between both the process and the experience of writing fan fiction and writing novels. So I'm going to ask you a question that I didn't prep you for, which is, What do you find challenges you, well, not challenges, what satisfies you most as an author? Completing a novel or writing fan fiction where you get lots of emails telling you how great your fan fiction is? Amanda?
Completing a novel. When I was writing fan fiction, I had an idea in my head that I wanted to write. I had a story or just a sort of nugget of a fix it for something, and I didn't have a plan. I never planned when I wrote fan fiction, and the story that eventually made the leap from fan fiction to publishing for me, I wrote entirely on a train commute because I was bored, and I went from Hastings to London every day. I had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and the only thing that kept me awake was doing something on my computer. And I basically wrote a chapter and uploaded it to Archive of Our Own for about 8:30 in the morning. And when I came back home that evening, I read the comments and I replied to them. And those two things kept me occupied for the train journey. So I had no plan at all. I was doing it for me. I was doing it because I had an idea for a story. And when I did that, it was sort of to keep me entertained during the day. I didn't realize I'd written what ended up being a very popular story. But when I write a novel, I put a lot more work into it, and I use the BSB Grow how scenes and structure and POV and things like that, and I put a lot more work into it. And I like to pick up that first book and see where I am now, and I find that's a lot more growth. So I loved fan fiction, and I really enjoyed the sort of instant feedback of it. But I feel like I'm creating a bigger body of work, and I can see the growth. So for me, that's more important for me.
How about you, Meghan?
I think that fan fiction is more fun and more freeing. And I think that writing a novel is more satisfying. I mean, just like Amanda was saying, fan fiction, it's great because you get to make all your own decisions. You get to make all your own mistakes. You get to publish before you should have. You get, all kinds of things that, aren't going to happen with a novel. And I do take my novels more seriously. I mean, for the most part, they're longer, although I did write a novel length fan fiction before. But they take a lot more also original character developments, and that in and of itself is a huge task in a novel, to actually make characters that people care about. So being able to do that, and that kind of being able to lean on the people that half the work is already done because people already love the characters. You don't have to do that part. And when I can make people love my characters that I came up with, that's extra satisfying for sure.
Gunn, what are your thoughts?
As Meghan said, it's a lot of fun with fan fiction for many reasons, but the whole experience with planning and with your book, even with the synopsis and everything, but then working with Shelley, communicating with Sandy and with Cindy Crescent and all the others at Bold Strokes, and being part of the whole family at Bold Strokes. It's so satisfying in so many ways, and I take great pride in all my books, and I'm just so equally grateful to fan fiction for getting me there, even if it did create a lot of bad habits that I needed to get rid of.
Yeah, we're getting to that.
No, I think I had a really great time, and I made some friends that I still have, that I actually got to meet at some of the events that we do. But I was also glad that, because I think I was not the first, but one of the first that you signed. So I think now it's very interesting to see how much the company's grown, how many people show up at our events. And I think now it's more satisfying to write the novels, and not just, I don't just write them, I actually read a lot of the stuff that we put out. I don't have time to read all of it, but I do, like everybody else, you have your favorites, so you do set aside some time to read stuff. But I think one of the most satisfying things that I've heard is that when we're out at, whether it's GCLS or whatever else that you attend, is that people say when they pick up that book and it's got that little BSB little triangle at the bottom, that they know it's going to be a good book because it's well edited. And I think that's one of the main things. One of my mother used to tell us all the time, the one inheritance that she would leave us was our education. And I think that your education is never done. So while I give Vic and I give a really hard time, in every single book, you learn something that you wouldn't be able to do in fan fiction. Because I mean, how many qualified editors are reading fan fiction and actually going to edit your work? So I think the books get better. I think I'm working on number 32 right now. So they get better, and they are actually fun. I mean, I think that it's a fun process from the time you sit to write to the time you sit to edit, and then you send it off and you're done. But I think it's been a great process. And at the beginning, you have a lot to choose, not a lot to choose from, but you have different companies. So I think I've made the right choice.
Well, we're keeping you. So, talking about bad habits, what did you have to unlearn or relearn when you started working with a publisher, publishing your novel, relative to your fan fiction experience? Amanda, I can see you raising your eyebrows over there, so you go first.
Thanks. Everything I had to unlearn. I knew how to tell a story, but I didn't know any of the technical aspects of it. So when a former publisher said to me, we'd like to publish this, I was like, yeah, okay, thinking I would go, and then I'd get on with my life. But then there was this editing thing, and I kind of knew what POV was, but I didn't care about it or think about it in any way. And show don't tell and grammar and everything, every technical aspect. And I will say, I had a comment, I had a review comment on one of my fan fictions once where someone told me, you're actually a good writer, but if you could fix these issues, you'd be much better. And I was like, because I didn't want to. I ran a marketing agency and I just posted fan fiction for fun. And I was like, go away, like with your rules. And I didn't think it was important. And then later on I was like, should have listened, because all of that was really good stuff. So yeah, there was a lot I had to learn. And I think it's really important now. I think it's important to point out for anyone who is writing fan fiction, who thinks, oh yeah, those rules don't really matter. The one thing that I really discovered, and this really stuck with me, is the rules are there for a reason. They help make your book, your novel, as accessible to as many people as possible. Because when you think, oh, I know who's thinking that and who's saying that and why they're doing that and what they're thinking and everything, that's your perspective. But those technical details enable you to tell the reader without telling the reader. And it's those little details that make a really big difference in the way you tell that story. So I had to unlearn pretty much everything other than the actual fabric of how to tell the story. And that was a big process, but one I'm really happy that I've done and continue to do.
Meghan?
I
Anything you had to undo?
Definitely. There's definitely certain writing tropes in fan fiction that you fall into very easily. I know one big one in the beginning for me was I had to not say things like the detective when I'm talking about one of the main characters. I mean, that's something, or the blonde-haired woman. I mean, you see that a lot in fan fiction. It's definitely something I fell into. And at a different level, I had to unlearn my wordiness, because when I was writing fan fiction, I can make that story 180,000 words, and that's fine, and people eat it up. But when you're gonna like write a novel, that's not fine, and you need to be, more selective with what you're showing, and every scene should matter, etc. And that was something I really had to learn, making that transition.
Yeah, I do. I think there's a different way of absorbing the material in fan fiction than there is in a novel. And, I've certainly had people tell me, well, I would read your grocery list, or I would read Cam and Blair's grocery list. And maybe they would, but they won't read it in a novel. Because there's a different expectation. And probably if you didn't put that stuff in your fan fiction readers might be disappointed.
Yeah.
Gon, anything in particular that stands out for you that you had to change?
Well, two things. I think I was the expert of the blonde woman, the tall woman, the short woman, the older woman, the captain, the ex-Borg. And But then also all the tags, instead of she said, then she did also. So she laughed, she agreed, she all those tags after the dialogue, after the whatever they said. So those two things, because I remember the first time I got my first book, the manuscript back, and it wasn't even the edited, it was the very first, I think, when those readers who read your book to see if it's any good at all, when you submit something, and it came back in multicolor. It looked like someone slaughtered a pig. I was like, my God. But it was a lot. But interesting is that I wrote, just to see if I could still write in Swedish, I wrote a whole dystopian novel and had a Swedish friend read it. And she said, you have some Americanisms going on.
That's
we
funny.
Don't cup cheeks in Swedish. No, we don't. That's
What do you do in
probably
Swedish?
Yeah, but we don't say it like that. So I had to, but it was fun either way. But so that was my main problems, I think, that I needed to unlearn.
Yeah, that came up in a session that we had done when we decided to do this session about fan fiction conventions. And those are two of the really super big ones that you see in all the fan fiction. The description of characters as opposed to using their name. I mean, once a character has been named, then their name should appear and not the physician. I did it. I went back and I looked at Safe Harbor because like all of you, I started writing fan fiction, and that's what you read. You tend to write what you read. And if you've, and this leads me into my next question. Allie, I'm going to get back to you on what you had to unlearn. So let's do that. And then we'll go into the next question. Did you have to unlearn anything, or were you perfect from the beginning?
Yeah. Oh, no. Still not perfect. No, I think it was POV. It was like, POV, what?
And that means
really hard to learn.
She's talking about point of view for, those of you who don't know the lingo or don't use it.
Yeah, so that one, I think I have that one down. But I think the other one is I have a tendency to repeat words. And I think now what I've learned is I learn a bunch of stuff when I write a novel, and then we go through the editing process, and then I remember those, and then I learn new mistakes to make. So I still repeat some words, which I'm trying to put some other words to not write the words that I tended to repeat. So I still have a problem with that. The word look, sense, that kind of thing. To go through and search them out and take them out. There's other ways to put it.
So here's my question for you to send a message to the potential authors in the audience. All of you have said how much you really liked writing fan fiction and how inspiring the feedback was, and how it's fun and relaxing. Do you think, how important was writing fan fiction to your present career? Do you think that, does it exist beside as something separate from your career, or is it a continuum, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Gunn?
I think perhaps because I'm, in a way, it's a way for me to promote myself a little bit. So it helps my career that way, I think, because since I'm not living in the US where there are easier access to events and so on. Every December, I do an advent calendar on my website with a fan fiction story where they click on a door. And if you only know what bribes I have been offered over the years to open doors in advance. My husband used to say, take the money, take the money. But so I think for me, it's both tremendously fun, and I've had, like Ali said, so many friends. And I feel I have two fandoms that are kind enough, many of them, to buy my books, which I'm forever grateful for. So I think for me, it's a definite plus. Absolutely.
Meghan?
Well, it's so intertwined with the beginning of me writing at all. I mean, fan fiction's really when I discovered there was even such a thing as lesbian fiction. It's a very formative time for me in college, and I met so many people who ended up being in the publishing world. You, obviously, Lori Lake was also a mentor to me in the very beginning. So a lot of these things kind of just, yeah, it just kind of was a continuation. I just started in fan fiction, and along with a lot of other people at the time, sort of floated into the publishing world. And I still have many readers who found me during my fan fiction days, who are still with me, which is awesome. And like I said, I've written fan fiction over the years, usually under a pseudonym. A lot of times it's heterosexual. I just like getting the feedback and if it's characters I'm interested in. But I like always going back there because anytime I do, I end up finding some new readers who end up wanting to read my published stuff. So it's very much still intertwined.
And it's a way for exposure, as you both said.
Absolutely.
Amanda, is it kind of all of a piece for you, or?
Fan fiction was hugely important because if I hadn't have started writing fan fiction, I never would have been a published author. So I was incredibly lucky, and I was really glad to find fan fiction because, like everyone said so far, it's a community. You meet so many people. I met my wife through a Star Trek Voyager board, which is the geekiest meeting ever because everyone goes, "Oh, how did you meet?" And I'm like, "Don't say." We just met online is a really good coverall. But yeah, fan fiction has just been massively important and to sort of get to this part of my career. And like Meghan was saying, I'm so blessed that so many people who wrote read my fan fiction came with me into publishing, and so many people had no idea that lesbian fiction existed. When I announced I had a publishing deal, they were like, "With who?" And I'm like, "It's this place with other books like this." And there are so many of my sort of old fan fiction readers who contact me and say thank you because I've just discovered this wealth of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books I had no idea existed, and they're just plowing their way through everyone's back catalogues, and that's really lovely. It's a really sort of lovely sort of community thing to bring together, and just so blessed to have sort of met that community and to have been told really that I was good at writing, because I would never have had that confidence to have thought I was otherwise.
I do want to interject that, again, we're a very biased panel because we've all written fan fiction. I don't want to give potential authors in the audience the idea that you have to write fan fiction first to learn how to be an author, since everybody's shaking their head. I mean, it's a thing unto itself. Lots of people write fan fiction and never write anything else, and don't have no interest in it and love it. And the community is I agree. I mean, it's incredibly fun and supportive. And I met a lot of really cool people, including on the X-Files list, my wife. So that's not even an unusual occurrence. But in terms of being published, it's not necessary. It's not required. It's not going to give you a leg up. The reason someone had asked this question about publishing fan fiction and how do we feel about it and what are the copyright issues. And I am not an attorney, and I'm especially not a copyright attorney. So if any of you may have had some experience with this issue, but you can't publish other people's characters. You can't publish Voyager fan fiction and use those characters per se. It's copyright infringement. You cannot take the plot of a TV show and turn it into a book and publish it. It's copyright infringement. But on the other hand, descriptions of characters are not unique. And if you create those characters that resemble characters from a television show that may be recognizable to readers, whether they are or not, that's not. Ordinarily, we at BSB, since that's what we're talking about today, do not publish fan fiction, but we have published authors who have written fan fiction, and we have published adaptation of their fan fiction. And I think that's fine. I think that if you start with a work of fan fiction and you expand it, you make the characters original, you have an original story, then it is an original work. We are all inspired by something. And if we're inspired, I was inspired to write the Justice series by The Wire, the television show. And it doesn't resemble it at all, but there are probably elements from it. And you know, we are all inspired by the things that we read and other people's writing. But you cannot take the recognizable work that is something else and use that in a book. So does anybody have any comments on that? Ever run into it? Any thoughts?
I did run into it.
Yeah.
Someone wanted to take one of my fan fictions and try to publish it for a different fandom. And I was like, well, that's technically my copyright because it was not the original characters, not the original setting. It was just literally the people just had the same names. That's the only thing that is of any similarity to the show it was based on. And she wanted to take them or take the whole story and just put basically 2 other character names in from a different show. So I said, well, no, that would be my copyright. She said, oh, but that's not your copyright. So we got into a bit of a discussion about it because there's nothing in the story that relates to the TV show in any way, shape or form, except those 2 names. And she'd already tried to sell another story to a publisher. And the publisher wasn't aware that it was a British TV show. So she said, oh, do I need to tell them that? I was like, yes, you will absolutely need to tell them, because they were an American publisher and they had no idea. And yeah, I think a lot of people think that, you know, once you've written a fan fiction, it's as if you've sort of claimed it. It's now yours. It's like, no, you've got the idea from somewhere. And if it's someone else, it's like, if it's like Lost or something, or, you know, a really, really popular IP address that's very, very unique, someone somewhere is going to find out about that. And you need to be extremely careful.
Yeah. Anybody else? I've had someone actually take one of my books and change the 2 characters' names and then publish the whole thing.
Yeah.
I've had people
that's like the ultimate fan fiction.
It's bold.
Yeah, I have people take my fan fiction frequently and publish it in Russian and other languages.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that happens.
Yeah, and you think, sorry, what? and they're like, oh, we didn't think you'd mind because it's more publicity for you. It's like,
publicity.
In what world?
Yeah.
No,
it's when they
yeah,
take
I've seen 13 hours in many forms online.
Yeah.
Many fan fictions that are 13 hours.
All right. Well, I think we've hit all the questions that have come through. I think that we all are pretty much in agreement that fan fiction, very much for those of us here, was a big part of what got us finding a reading community, writing for that community, and ultimately writing novels. And I think that those in the audience have supported us, probably many of us, throughout our careers. So we also thank all of you for being here today. Thank you, panelists, very much. It was a great discussion, and I hope that those in the audience can stay for our pitch session that's coming up next, which is a really fun session showing authors pitching to an editorial team from BSB. Thanks, everybody, and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a great afternoon.